So what if I told you that your chronological age didn't actually matter? And each time we have a birthday, we might be telling a little bit of a fib. Because what's actually more important, according to today's guest, is our biological age, the age at which we're aging internally. And so I was fascinated with this. I saw a little documentary on the BBC about this a few years ago, and so I brought in one of the co-founders of a company called GlycanAge, and I got the test done on myself. And so in this podcast, I get to speak to Nicolina about how do we slow down aging, scientifically speaking. What are the things we need to be doing? How can we test for it? What are the things that speed up our biological age, and how can we avoid them? So as a biohacker and somebody that's a father and quite frankly just wants to stay healthier for longer, this was a really important conversation, and I think you'll get a lot of nuggets from here which you can apply directly today from this conversation. So we go through so many different topics, so I won't keep you any longer. So here's Nicolina from GlycanAge. Cheers. I'm 43, nearly 44. What is the problem with me measuring my passport chronological age?
We all age at different rates, and the passport age doesn't really reflect health in a very good way. So even within the UK, life expectancy can vary by 17 years. So the average person who lives in Richmond lives 17% more than the average person who lives in Blackpool. So this variability, some of us, the oldest living person so far, if you believe the records, is 122 years old. Well, the average life expectancy, country from late 70s to mid 80s, it doesn't really, this kind of lifespan capacity we have is not very well reflected in your chronological age. And it doesn't explain this gap of why some of us get to 35, while somebody else gets to 122. So measuring that from a health perspective, even from an aging perspective, only kind of gives you one small piece of the puzzle, which is not the key driver in health span or lifespan.
So what is it that you guys are measuring to give the age that you give? So just to give people some context here, and we're going to get into this today, you have a company that helps people measure and then improve their biological age. Would that be fair?
Correct. And our specific field of aging is inflammaging. So that's the theory behind it, because there's many fears of aging. So is aging a program? Can we reprogram it? Or is this kind of continuous damage for life? And inflammation or this theory of inflammation is an interesting component. It's now 25 years old. It was coined by this Italian scientist called Claudio Franceschi. And he was explaining that this low-grade systemic inflammation is a key component of aging, but it's also a driver. So you can have a young person who, because of high stress load, is aging much quicker, and their immune system is building up this low-grade chronic inflammation, and that will lead to disease much earlier in life and to accelerated aging. And then you can have a much older person who has a much younger level of inflammation, but they will be inflamed even without disease just because they've aged. So it's this kind of vicious cycle inflammation, which is both a consequence of aging, but it can be a driver of accelerated aging in itself. So we specialize in a certain molecule called glycans, and we can go into that. But we started our nonprofit research institute did the first large study of this 20 years ago. And there we saw these signals of aging. So you would see a strong signal of age, then we wouldn't be able to understand the disease cohorts we were looking at unless we knew age of a patient, because it was one of the strongest signals. And then this was developed into a method to give you a biological age number. This is 15 years ago. And the field greatly expanded since then, because 15 years ago, you didn't really have much of a aging or longevity industry. And now everybody, or preventive health, has been rebranded into longevity. And measuring aging is a big component of it. So it kind of, this became a mainstream focus. And for us, we've always specialized in this certain molecules, which you can apply to an age measurement, but you can also predict heart attack and stroke by looking at the same molecules. And you can also give somebody immune resilience, which is then your resilience to future morbidity and mortality. So it's not just about the age, it's what we can extract from these specific molecular drivers that we haven't really had in healthcare up to now.
So I want to dig into all of this for my simple brain. So the first thing is, and I don't think I've ever been given like a really clean answer on this, like what is inflammation? Can you just describe what that is? Because if I had to take a test on it, I think I'd really struggle to answer that question.
And here, so the immune system is so complex. There's many ways to measure inflammation, and most biomarkers we use now are acute measures of inflammation, meaning you have an infection, and this will accelerate this inflammatory biomarker like CRP, for example. But this low-grade inflammation is more this kind of gradual loss of the capacity of the immune system to regulate systemic inflammation. So we would look at it through these sugar molecules which are around your antibodies, which are not a consequence of sugar in your tea. So they're nothing to do with the diabetes, glycation, or glucose. They're these complex carbs that were developed to change the function of these antibodies and make them more pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So we look at these molecules that would regulate, they would make this protein more inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. They can serve as both. So there's no simple answer what inflammation is, because there can be different causes, different sides to the immune system. This is more the adaptive, the aging, because we look at antibodies. So it's this learning, aging immune system. Well, if you were looking at a different protein, that would be more the innate or this kind of immediate activation of inflammation from when you have a cut or you have a bacterial infection.
So I got really into biohacking several years ago through a mutual friend of ours, Tim Gray, who runs the Health Optimization Summit. And I remember hearing about something called Telomeres and how they were one of the best ways to truly measure your biological age. So how does that differ from what you're doing? Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed, Nicolina. I find this stuff truly fascinating because it shows me that there are things we can change in our day-to-day lifestyle which are improving us at a cellular level, which is so cool. So if you're interested in getting your own biological test done with a GlycanAge, the link is below. It's the exact same test I've done. Very simple, very easy to do, and you get your results back really quickly. And if you've got any questions or reflections from this podcast, please pop them below. It's actually really good for you and for everybody else because it means that you're more likely to remember the things you've learned from here, and it can help somebody else. So thank you so much for being here. If you're on YouTube, YouTube recommends this video here, so have a look at this next, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.
So the field is constantly evolving, so we're learning new things, and that's the point of science. We realize we don't see the complete picture. Let's do more research and learn something new. So telomeres were this initial theory of what we can do to measure aging because they were relevant to aging of a single cell. So, and as these telomeres would shorten, the cell would die. So if you have short cell telomeres, that means that it's an old cell that's not going to live a long time. But we have trillions of cells. And depending on where you collect the sample, you can have a completely different result because all of them have different ages. So if you did this telomere test in the morning versus evening, afternoon, you could be 10 years, 20 years up and down just based on the type of sample you collected. And then in the large studies, that didn't really correspond well to health outcomes, or it wasn't giving us a complete picture of systemic aging. So that's been already, we have large studies in that showing that it's not relevant for long-term outcomes, but it's a great measure of aging of a single cell. And a lot of this focus originally, so there's this paper which is famous in the aging space called the hallmarks of aging, where you then have telomeres as one component, DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, and all of that's relevant to what's happening within the cell, where the focus was on the cell. And we were not focusing on the system, and immunology wasn't the key component on it. That came later. So then 10 years later, they corrected that paper, said there are many more hallmarks than those 12, and actually and they thought that inflammation was a consequence of some of these things, like DNA damage, senescent cells, or mitochondrial dysfunction. And now they agree that inflammation is not just a consequence of what's happening there, it's also a driver. And it can be a driver of aging. And majority of the interventions that work, like fasting, hormone replacement, therapeutic plasma, all of these things function for inflammation. So more and more effort on what's happening to the system is now focused on immunology. Yeah. And this is where our science plays a key role, because these complex sugars evolve to help your cells communicate. So all the cell-to-cell communication happens through glycans. And then this fine-tuning of how our proteins, even our lipids function, happens through glycans. So they're this layer in helping us become multi-cell, or if we didn't have this glycan component, we would still be single cell.
Gotcha. And how would you describe glycans to a child? Like what is that as like a simple term?
Maybe simple naming, we haven't used it, by immunocarbs. That's the one we measure, but you would have them everywhere. So they're let's think it's a child. So I would say how healthy they help measure how healthy your immune system. So if your immune system is overreacting to something that it shouldn't, like a food, or if it's responding in the right way and it's not kind of making you vulnerable to long-term disease.
I guess the $1 million question is, what are because you've mentioned stress and inflammation, what is it? What's causing us to have accelerated aging then? What are the big things that we should be wary of?
We can start to make some conclusion, and it's different things in different people. So for example, there's this complex system where I think our biomarker will play the key role of, what keeps us in balance or homeostasis, inflammation being hormones. So one of the differences why women on average have 4 extra years of life compared to men. Now, unfortunately, those extra years also come with more disease. So post-menopause, they have more disease. But because of this hormonal difference, and here we believe estrogen is a key driver, women they have much less chronic disease compared to men up until the age of menopause. And then this flips over as their ovaries stop producing their hormones. So this decline in hormones, if we look at the things that most strongly associate with aging, the decline in hormones is one, and that's true for men and women. It's just that women have this cliff, which is menopause. And then the other one is stress. And I think here it's a complex picture, but let's use some examples for it. For example, if you had PTSD, which is a chronic traumatic, you're constantly in fight or flight because of a previous traumatic event. And you have different severity of that. But individuals who are diagnosed with PTSD, their life expectancy is shortened. So it's 15 to 20 years shorter than the average person. And it's not that they get any unusual disease. They get all the classical diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, just 10 to 15 years earlier than the rest of the population. So this is in a way chronic stress, or your psychology accelerating chronic disease. And all of these chronic diseases have a common mechanism or mechanistic driver, which is this low-grade systemic inflammation. So stress is potentially one of the strongest markers we have of aging, but it's so complex to understand. So I think that the closest analogies we have is different mental health disorders, and all of them shorten life expectancy, even ADHD. ADHD shortens your average life expectancy 8 to 13 years. So I think this is the proof we have that stress can accelerate aging. But how do we measure it individual? What is the right intervention for a certain individual? I think that space is now growing.
Let's dig in. So I've got ADHD. I've never heard that before. So now my stress levels have just shot up. I've never heard that before. So can you, what's going on there? Why would ADHDers live a little bit less or a lot less?
I think that, and this is my kind of theory. I think there is good evidence building on it, but all of these kind of, I don't like calling it mental disorders, maybe deviation from the norm, let's put it that way. They probably have a stress component or some type of traumatic event component. There is, of course, genetic predisposition, but there needs to be an environmental trigger. And I think in ADHD, we first thought it was a dopamine deficiency. So it's just kind of different wired brain, and it's a dopamine deficiency and needs to be fixed. But that doesn't seem to be the case, because it doesn't, all the medication tools we have, they don't really alter the disease. They help us deal with the symptoms of it. And it does seem to go family through family, but it's not purely genetic. And what's happening probably is this early childhood stress replicates itself in some way. And if we think of ADHD as a survival strategy, then it's very good, because you're hyper vigilant. You're not focused on one thing. You're hyper vigilant to your environment, and then you can hyper focus when you need to, and you usually activate when you're facing a real threat or your life is, a deadline. Your life is in danger, and that's, in a way, you're preserving energy for when you most need it. When you have to, run for your life, which could be, complete a deadline at work, which is potentially then connected to early childhood stress. And that could be fixed by fixing this kind of imbalance in the nervous system. So for me, I had lots of symptoms of it. It was probably ADHD, early teens going into 20s. And then I think now it's more ADD, but I don't need medication to function. If I have like a high stress period, I'm not sleeping properly, then medication helps. But what fixed it most for me was meditation. I did this Vipassana retreat when I was 24, and it had a permanent response on my permanent impact on my stress response. And I did it a few times after, but it was kind of like a rewiring that sticked through life. And then other moments could also trigger it, where maybe psychotherapy helped me more than the meditation, but it does seem to be connected to the stress response in a way that you are preserving your energy for when you need it most. And it does change, because my symptoms changed significantly over the last 15 years. So I think it's not a permanent state. It's more of a predisposition, and then, rewiring it gently through life. Let's put it that way. And hopefully I'm passing on to my kids.
The same, I think about my, how do I not pass it? Because I feel my parents have got a touch of this, and siblings, and probably grandparents had it as well. And so I'm trying to be a bit of a generational break with it. Okay, well, look, I'm excited to dig in, because obviously I've taken the test and you've got some results we can go through. And it'd be really good to bring this to life for people a little bit, because I do have the ADHD. I've suffered with stress my entire life, but then I found breathwork about 10 years ago, and I've tried to adopt as many of those practices as I reasonably can to help relax me. And I do a lot of things like sauna on a regular basis, lift heavy weights. I've got a grounded bed and a number of other things. So, I'm trying to manage this, so it would be good to go through the results a little bit. I know some people will be listening, so we can audibly talk through what we're going to see as well. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just pulling apart a couple of the bits from the report.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we show your
Yeah,
report?
that'd be great. Yeah, if you can.
I want to add to the part about kids. I think this depends on the environment. If you are born in a war, or in an environment that demands this type of even, for example, surgeons, it can serve them really well because they're hyper vigilant, and then they're hyper focused. So I think it depends on the environment. It could be the exact thing your kids need in a certain environment, but then it doesn't serve them so well in the long term, and especially if they don't adapt, or you don't adapt to this change of environment. So I don't think it's a negative. I think it's just the adaptation that we get stuck in. But let's go on to your results, and I'm going to share screen, but because some people can see the screen, I'll try and be descriptive.
A couple of caveats, because we'll go through the results, but I made some really significant changes in my life at the start of the year, and so I wonder how quickly they would have affected things. So I stopped drinking alcohol on December 31st. I've not had any alcohol this year, and I had a rotten tooth taken out of my mouth, a wisdom tooth that had been there for 10 years hurting. And they pulled that out, and they took all my mercury fillings out at the start of the year as well. So it would have been, it's a shame, but it would have been so interesting to have tested this time last year, because I would imagine it would have shifted. But yeah, over to you. It'd be interesting to see your thoughts.
It would have. So it would definitely have an impact. So it's a shame you don't have this period, but of course things will happen through life. So your results will also change. But the one you did here, so you did a test back in March, and I'm just going to open the one with your results. So this is your biological age, and it's inflammation. So you can also think of it as an immune age if we narrow it down to the area where it's most relevant. And your immune system resembles that of an average 20-year-old, which is excellent in this moment in time. Now, what affects it? About 40% of it, when we do the twin studies, and we did lots of studies with Twins UK, 40% of it is genetics. But then 60% of it is epigenetics and your environment. So it kind of is a reflection of everything, the kind of lucky cards you had from your parents, also the environment. So epigenetics is everything that happens from when you were in your mother's womb to today, and then the last 3 months of lifestyle, because the half-life of the molecule is around 21 days. So 6 to 8 weeks, you have a full, so you can see significant change in that period. Although some years it moves very gradually, and some years you can have rapid acceleration, which can be connected to different things. For example, menopause will accelerate it, or high stress, loss of a loved one, grief. So these things have a big impact. And of course, lifestyle changes, weight gain, weight loss, exercise, over-exercise, all of these things have an impact. But here you're doing great. So I would say for you, maybe looking at it once a year to see what happened in the year. And then in years that you're doing more, so you're doing some intervention, it's good to have a baseline and a follow-up to see if what you've done has made a positive or negative impact. And this is a good proxy for future outcomes. So as we go down for the report, we've added a page on biological age rank, because our original age was built on biobanks. We've had 300,000 samples so far that we collected from different biobanks, a lot of healthy individuals tracked through life, and we can tell you exactly how old your glycans are. So here, compared to the average individual from the biobank, you're a 20-year-old. And then if we look at it to the GlycanAge users, so these are commercial customers. So these are people who go and buy the test themselves. They can do it online, or they access it through their healthcare providers. And we work with 2,000 private healthcare providers around the world. So here we looked at how do you compare to this average GlycanAge user? And when we look at our data set compared to the biobank, the average user is about 7 years younger, or the immune system is 7 years younger than our biobank data. So we know that there's a healthy user bias. And here you're in the 1%. So it's not very common to have your result, even in the super healthy people, which is great. And then if we go down, this is a new metric on immune resilience. We've done quite a bit of research. So we have a research group which has 60 full-time scientists, 35 postdocs, and we publish between 30 and 40 peer-reviewed papers per year. We've had over 350 so far. And we've done quite a bit of work on mortality. So looking at this as a proxy to predict future mortality and morbidity, so time to disease, time to all-cause mortality. And we see that this is more predictive than the mortality predictors you can get from routine blood work. And also it captures a different driver. It captures this low-grade inflammation that current clinical drivers don't. So we realize, and this is mortality in decades ahead. So usually we see these early changes in glycosylation up to 10 years prior to symptoms in a diagnosis. So it's not a problem unless you do something about it in the next 10 years. So let's put it that way. So it's not bad news. I say even bad news is good news in this case. And this would be a proxy for your future morbidity mortality risk. And here you're doing also quite well. You're on the 85th percentile. And this is again from the biobank data. So you're doing really, really well. Of course, we see individuals who are in the 99th percentile, but at this moment, your resilience to future chronic disease is quite high. And then when we say immune resilience, this is not just because we were talking about infectious disease. just now before we started the podcast. And yes, to a degree, it is resilience to short-term infectious disease, but it also depends on the environment you're in. So if you have a young child that's picking up everything that's available on the market at the nursery or school, then of course you're more exposed, and then doesn't mean that your resilience is going to go down because of it. It's more the immune system related to chronic disease. So think of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmunity, and all these chronic diseases that have an inflammatory component. Okay, now as we go through more of the reports, this is the balance between the different type of glycans. So on your antibodies, you have 31 different type of these complex sugars, and they would have different functions. So they would make the antibody more pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and certain, we can also not just tell, hey, there's chronic inflammation, we can start to distinguish where is it coming from. Is it hormonal imbalance? Is it autoimmunity? Is it cardiometabolic disease or risk? And where would it go in the future? So what is your personal trajectory? So here, the key drivers for age are these, we call them glycan youth and glycan mature, but they're structures that have these anti-inflammatory sugars at the top, so they work anti-inflammatory, or they don't have these anti-inflammatory ones, so they work pro-inflammatory. And here, the most positive driver for you is this G0, so you don't have a lot of these pro-inflammatory structures at the moment. And this would be highly linked to hormones, actually estrogen. And it's estrogen in men and women, because men also need a healthy level of estrogen. So we see that men who have suppressed testosterone, if they go on replacement, it can act anti-inflammatory, but only if you don't block aromatase, which is a conversion of testosterone to estrogen. And you need a healthy dose for a man. And this is why, for example, taking testosterone as a steroid in bodybuilding, where you're going really, really high, but then you're completely blocking estrogen because you just want the muscle mass, is not healthy. We see that it's pro-inflammatory. Well, if you naturally have lost testosterone because of aging, and then you give back what's been lost, that balances the system in a healthy way. So here, this will be mostly linked to your hormonal profile. So maybe you can tell me a little bit there. I don't know if you do other blood work, but you're it's in a good range. And then the G2 or the youth one, these anti-inflammatory ones, you could have more of these. These are usually, sometimes we see them altered in autoimmune conditions. And then the sialic acid, so these are the most anti-inflammatory ones, they change the most significantly with the dietary impacts. So a healthy diet, supplements. In biohackers, usually they're quite high because you're doing many different interventions. And then if we go on the supportive ones, these don't change as much with age. So they're most specific to certain things. And the glycan medium is a complex one to understand. We're still kind of learning about it, but we would see that it can be cardioprotective. So if you have high levels of it, it's cardioprotective. And usually it's quite high in athletes. So yours could be better. And if you did more sports, this one would move positively. And then the bisecting, we say it's most impacted by stress, sleep, and smoking. So history of smoking, lack of sleep, chronic stress, here you could also be better. So maybe going through that, does any of it resonate?
Yeah, I mean, especially those last two, because I had my VO₂ Max done recently as well, and that was not optimal. And the technician said the same things, like you need to do more high intensity aerobic activity to build this up. So it's definitely on the list of things. Having a sedentary job like this is sometimes problematic. So that's useful. And then I've always struggled with sleep, like since I was a child. And I've put so many protocols in place. I've got the light blocking glasses, the magnesium, the earth bed, the cool room, the dark shades, and things have got a lot better. But then having a 3-year-old kicking you in the face is also not problematic as well. So sleep's always been, and maybe this is an ADHD thing and being vigilant, but to ever get into the deep safe levels of sleep, it takes a lot of effort to do that for me, because my brain, I have to wear earplugs. If I hear, like last night it was raining, the rain woke me up. So that is resonating very heavily, those last two.
Yeah, I have the same thing, actually. They're very hard to kind of sleep fully safely, and you're hypervigilant, especially for sound. So I will react to any small sounds. And I can explain why this is, but we can do this. We can do this later. But I won't go into more of it here because this can get quite technical. But we have these overlaps with future risk factors. So similar if you did a genetic report, and then we'll look at how your profile compares to a disease or disease risk. We do the same with glycans, and the difference is these are modifiable. So any overlap you have with a future risk is modifiable. And here, there's no significant overlap with the ones we have. So we call them, categorize them into health areas because it's way pre-disease, but cardiovascular health, metabolic, autoimmune, respiratory, everything looks pretty good for you right now. And I won't go into more of it. I'll keep this.
I would just love to ask you though about respiratory, because this is like my main modality. What is your test looking for, and what would be deemed as poor respiratory versus good respiratory? Like what's the connection there with the breathing system and that?
It's specific to the studies we've had. So quickly, and these are references for the studies. So this was we give the kind of confidence interval in this, and this one's a relatively small study. So we had a cohort of 100. What was it? So 95 controls, 61 COPD patients, then a split with male and female, and then a replication cohort. And we see that there's a certain glycan pattern that would look like COPD. But of course, we see these changes much earlier, and this is a small cohort. So it doesn't mean that. And you can have similar overlap. So it's not a diagnostic test. It's a overlap with what's in the published literature. And here, what's interesting, the ones that drive it are the glycan median and the bisecting. So what you were saying about VO₂ max, median will improve as you do more activity. And then this glycan bisecting is sleep, smoking, stress. So this one will also improve in these things, which is, I think, quite interesting when you look at it as a connection to breathwork. And I think that's an area you know a lot about.
Yeah, so I would love to ask you then. So if you meet somebody at a conference or wherever, and they are saying, "Okay, Nicolina, what are the biggest things I can do starting now that's going to positively shift me?" Like, what are your top 3, top 4 biggest things that people can start to do here?
It has to be very personalized. So I think all of this generic advice doesn't work, and it has to be specific to the context and figuring out what is a key driver of a problem for you. So if it's woman in perimenopause, menopause, who's not replacing her hormones, the best thing she can do is go on hormone replacement. We see that has an incredibly significant effect on your inflammation and your immune aging. And we have long-term data now. So you have studies that have tracked women on HRT, not on HRT for 50, 60 years. And when you start hormone replacement early, so around the age of menopause, or the first 10 years, ideally even perimenopause, this reduces all-cause mortality by 40%. Even in the UK Biohacking data, they were looking at the drugs that have the most significant impact on lifespan, and estrogen was number one. I think aspirin was on there as well, and Viagra for some reason. But that was there's some drugs that have been used in practice for a long, long time that have a known positive effect on lifespan. So if you are a woman in perimenopause, that's number one.
Well, can I ask you, so Viagra helps improve lifespan?
So in this data from the UK Biobank, where they were looking at the drugs which had the most significant effect on long-term outcomes. But of course, this is association, so nobody knows what's causal here. I think for estrogen, we have a lot of understanding on the biology behind and how this impacts the immune system. But Viagra was originally looked at as a drug for cardiovascular disease and potentially cardioprotective. So that could be an element, and it could be something else. You can't kind of take out the confounding. And I think it's correct, but there is also aspirin, and there is quite interesting data on aspirin. And And we're actually just doing a study there with women on HRT, and then aspirin as a preventive for stroke. And we're looking at how this affects glycosylation and inflammation. But there are some known drugs that have been used for a while. And of course, all of them have, some risk and benefit, but in most of these, potentially the benefit outweighs any risk. And this is definitely true for estrogen. A lot of the claims about the risk were incorrect, or they were about a study 20 years ago with a different type of synthetic hormones, which were also introduced in women way past menopause. So I think that the average was 65 or at least 12 years post menopause. So it didn't have as much of a positive effect there as it did if it's early in menopause.
And so,
and then if you ask about the different individuals, so you have to find what is the key problem. And if somebody is obese, weight loss has the most significant effect. And we've seen it with caloric restriction, with just dietary change. We've done studies on bariatric surgery, now a lot more on GLP-1, and weight loss has reduces chronic inflammation significantly and changes your long-term outcomes. So if that's a key driver for you to change, then weight loss is the number one modality. And then if you are thinking of somebody who's, let's say, a high performer, a hyper optimizer, biohacker, and then they have super elevated inflammation, I don't want to generalize, but in a lot of cases, it's psychology that impacts that. And it's also a type of this hyper optimization is also a type of, I don't want to say OCD, there's some specific terms for it, but it's a psychology wiring that also needs to be rewired, because if you're having stress because you ate a cookie or there's it's probably outweighing the negative effect of that is outweighing the benefits being hyper optimized.
I read Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep book about 10 years ago, and it gave me the worst sleep anxiety for about 5 years. And I remember we were backpacking around Asia, and my wife now, she'd want to go and do things. I'm like, no, I'm not. I need to get my age. She'd like want to go up a volcano at midnight. I was like, impossible, because I need my sleep, and I missed out on all these really important things because I was so scared about, dying early because of poor sleep. So I get that. And I've worked with a lot of biohackers, and a lot of them have got what they, in their own words, they've got like health anxiety, and they're doing this thing to mitigate the health anxiety. And of course it's, so what advice would you have for people like that then, that are kind of because I'm like that, I feel as well, like got to optimize or you're going to die.
Yeah, I think I don't have to optimize, but you're going to die. But I do have a very active nervous system in periods of time. And I don't think there is any one size fits all for interventions, and you have to find what works for you. I think Vipassana as a modality had a significant effect on me on ADHD, but also general stress resilience. And that was because you learn how to sit with whatever, and you kind of experience it as a sensation in the body. So you're having pain, or you have tingles, which are more like pleasure. And it's understanding that no experience is permanent, because if you cling to it and you recreate it, for example, I had a period in my last year of university. I started a startup in my first year, and it was scaling quite rapidly. And I had to it was just the most horrible year. I didn't sleep for 6 months, or I would go to sleep and I would just not fall asleep. And what was happening is I was recreating what happened for a few days for a long period of time, because I didn't sleep good the next day. I go to bed, I think, I'm again not going to sleep well. Then I take something for it to reinforce that I have insomnia. And it was purely a mental disorder or mental deviation. And then I read a book on a lady who couldn't sleep for 14 years and tried absolutely everything until she realized in the end, the only thing keeping her awake, insomnia is not a disease, was her mind. And then everything she was doing for it was reinforcing that she had a problem. And when she understood that the only thing actually giving her the suffering, the 14 years of suffering, is her mind, that finally rewired. And I read this book, I put it down, I went to bed, I slept like a baby. And I never recreated that scenario again in my life. So I think it's different things in different moments. And I think I am the type of personality that responds very well to understanding why. So when I understand the why behind something, I can very easily change behavior. And I don't know if that's true for everybody. I think, behavioral change is definitely a field of science that needs a lot more understanding. But when I can understand what's the kind of the cause and work with that, resolve it, all of a sudden I can move past it very easily. And it was different things in different moments. So I think I started measuring the age when I was 24, and there was very around the 20s, didn't move much, even with crazy things happening in my life. Because when you're young, you're super resilient. You can go for everything. And then I would have these accelerations in kind of early 30s, and then they would go down. So go a decade up, a decade down. And the thing that changed it the most, psychotherapy. And the element that was triggering it the most was within relationships. I would have this trigger of abandonment, which would go back to my childhood. So I was born in 1991, where we had the Croatian Civil War happening, and my parents were super young. My dad was 20, my mom was 20. And I work with my dad. He's the chief scientific. This is his life work, really. And they had 3 kids before he was 25. Wow. In the middle of a war. So then, and then at 9 months, because they were both working on their doctorate, they sent me off to grandparents because kids were not allowed. And that was the best solution. But if you have a primary kind of attachment to your parent, and then you're kind of given to a grandparent, the child doesn't understand that this is the best person that can look after you right now. It feels like it won't survive because this primary carer has disappeared. So you feel like your life is in danger. And I've had it many times in this kind of first couple of years, because then my brother had a congenital heart condition. So I was then with grandparents for years, and I had this nervous system response that if a relationship would be falling apart, I would feel like I'm this young child that won't survive because my primary attachment has disappeared. So that was happening to me. I would have this very high elevation, and the thing that helped was psychotherapy. So being able to sit with this experience of, thinking that you're a 9-month-old, 2-year-old that believes they won't survive because of a relationship. So for my best intervention was their psychotherapy. And then different types changed. So then more recently I had these elevations, which were different types of trigger, but also psychology related and in a relational dynamic, because I think that was my vulnerability. Other people had different vulnerabilities. So I have a work colleague that I worked with for 10 years, and we would track her for the last at least 7 or 8 years. And she is a perfectionist, or her parents conditioned her that, if she doesn't perform, she doesn't get their approval. So she would have this kind of survival threat when things are not perfect. And in a company, things are constantly, especially startups, so things are never perfect. So we can kind of track this, which is purely psychology based for her, but on a different childhood wiring. So all of us have different wiring. And I think here we're starting to understand how much this plays into future disease. And I think every single disease will potentially have some psychology to work around, not just ADHD or any mental health disorders. There's an interesting modality of psychotherapy called internal family systems that we're now starting to do studies with. And they've had studies with rheumatoid arthritis, where this type of psychotherapy would reduce symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis compared to a control. And even some patients go into remission purely with psychotherapy. So you're not changing medication, you're just rewiring the mind, and you're changing a disease outcome. So I think potentially every disease will have a psychology component. And as we treat a human, we'll be treating the whole human, mind and whatever kind of molecular disorder we find. And these will be connected in some way. And maybe the connection is our fight or flight response, because there we optimize for short-term survival at the cost of long-term survival. Because if you have to run from a lion, you don't need to reproduce, you don't need to digest food, you don't need to fight infections, viruses, cancer. You just need to survive in a couple of minutes. And if you're in that state chronically, then all of these systems get suppressed. And this is where we have the most amount of problems and disease.
Yes. I would love to get your thoughts on, so you've been down the psychology route, and you've had what would commonly be called as a top-down approach. I was recently pulling together some research for a course, and you have kind of the Freudian set of dealing with principles. And he had a student called Reich, and Reich was actually going the other way. And he was actually noticing the posture of the person, the tight stomach, the tight hands. And he would call it, I think he called it character armor. And so he went the opposite direction to his mentor, and he was doing a body up approach. And I think today most modalities kind of do both. Obviously, breath work is a up, raising body up to mind approach. What are your thoughts on breath work, tremoring, shaking, all that sort of stuff when it comes to specifically glycans, GlycanAge, that sort of thing?
We have no idea because we have no studies on it. And we're just now starting to do more studies with PTSD, psychotherapy as intervention modalities. We need to do good research on it to claim. We can have case studies, of course, you have individuals before and after, and then you can show an impact of something. But I think all of them will potentially have a very positive impact. And you can work body to mind. I think you're very right there. Some people are very afraid of facing their thoughts in their mind. And because it is stored in the body, if you work with this body, it's a safer route to get there than if you go for the mind. So I think they have a lot of future, or they work very well. And some of them are ancient techniques. They've been around for an incredibly long time. We just didn't create the Western science for it to support it.
Interesting. So that's all emerging, all of that side of it. Yeah. And so what is your thoughts on breath work? Is it the same? Is there any evidence that you've got around breath work and biological age?
So I'm thinking, what's the closest to that? That will give us some. So I can't point to much academic evidence. I think there was some interesting work recently in mice and psilocybin extending lifespan in mice. So this was a long-term study that showed that psilocybin prolonged life expectancy in the mouse model. And breathwork does seem to get people to this, in a way, resembling sometimes, not all of it, but psychedelic state without necessarily the psychedelic compound. So I think that could be an interesting route that it works through and is a lot safer and more applicable broadly. But yeah, I think we need studies on it. And I think my team was even talking to you to do a little pilot on it. We're very keen.
Yeah, well, the minute I'm doing CO2 therapy, it's a little bit on hold at the moment, but I've been taking a dose or two of CO2 every day. And that's kind of why I was saying to you before we hit record, like part of me was hoping my glycogen results were going to be terrible. And then obviously we would do the CO2 and it got better, but they're in a great place. So, I'm not going to complain. But my theory is certain breathing techniques could age us. And I have no evidence for this, but this is just my theory. Because when I did the Wim Hof retreat 10 years ago, a lot of the people that were practicing that retreat, they're hyperventilating through their mouth. And they all look 10 years older than they were. I was really shocked at all the ages of these people that were doing it. I thought that's weird. And as I've gone through my career, I lean very much more to the gentle, rhythmic, nasal, soft, slow breathing. And I also feel like when you are jacking up the breath and you're hyperventilating, your heart's going crazy, your adrenaline's going through the roof. I know it's a stressor and there's some positives to it, but I suspect long-term use of those hyperventilation techniques might actually be an age acceleration process. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Because I'm not an expert, I can't tell you until we study it, but I think you do have a good point, because there are these hormesis, this kind of positive short terms for exercise is one of them, but there's many other factors, and that we see is positive because it kind of gives you the right amount of stress to kind of stretch the system for it to get back into balance. And I think this is also a theory of when you, because it's not that we're stuck in fight or flight, not because we're actually running from a threat to our life, it's the anticipation of a threat to our life. And actually experiencing that elevation, running from the lion and surviving is a way to resolve. So it could be that we're just stuck in this kind of anticipation of the threat, and going through the threat would resolve it. So but every stressor, even exercise, you can overdo to the point that it is pro-inflammatory. So if we look at professional athletes and moderate exercisers have the best immune aging. They're on average, I think, in women 10 years younger, and in men 7 as an average. And the pro athletes are as inflamed as a sedentary overweight. So they are, this kind of constant physical stress is aging the immune system. And they also have very short careers. They have a lot of, I think for them, it's more proneness to injury and the shortened career span where you see the effect, but they also have reduced lifespans. So I think in general, this over stressing the good things, which this Wim Hof method could be, we don't know. And I think it depends on how much of it you do, because I think everybody has a threshold which is positive, and then we don't have good ways to measure what's negative. But it'd be interesting to look at both in a small pilot and then see if there's a difference. But yeah, usually we see when people pile on stress, so you give intense exercise to, we had a cohort, we had 1,000 people going to the gym for the first time, between age 45 and 60. And all of them, or majority of them, were actually getting more inflamed, and they're accelerating. Because as you get to that age, if your body's not used to the exercise, you haven't had it lifelong, it's actually a stressor. And then you're piling that on top of a demanding work or family life, and then that's more stress. So less is sometimes less is more. And I think methods which are more gentle work better. And we have a lot of case studies on that, where you have like a high performance exec with 2 little kids that goes to HIIT training every evening. And we have studies on HIIT training, and we see it's positive in young 35-year-old men, the cohort that we studied. But in this female executive, her age was 15 or 17 years above. And the only thing she changed, her practitioner suggested she change a HIIT to yoga every evening because she needed something physical. And that dropped her age more than 13 years in 8 weeks. So that's changing of one stressor, removing the physical stress, changing into something which is more gentle, and having an incredible impact on her immune system. So I would say maybe the type of practice you're doing would be the same. You wouldn't overstress someone, but you would give them a gentle intervention that has a positive effect.
Yes. Hang on, my dog is going crazy. Give me a second.
No, you go.
It's because my wife's not here. There's no one to shush her up downstairs. So I would, again, we both know biohackers, so this might not be anything you can answer scientifically, but I've seen people talk recently, and I've interviewed people, neurosurgeons and whatnots, about artificial light, EMF, all these sort of things that are attacking our body, air quality, water quality. And so I would be really fascinated to know, if you were to repeat that gym study again, but you were to put a group of people outside doing gym work on grass in daylight versus artificial room, EMF, all that sort of stuff. Again, you might not even be able to go anywhere near this, but what are your thoughts on kind of moving back to Mother Nature's approach?
Yes, I think that'll be quite interesting. And yeah, absolutely. I think we need those type of interventions, which are a little bit more nature exposure. I think just general nature exposure will have an incredible impact on the immune system. And we do see on average in our data that people get slightly younger in the summer. And we don't know if that's purely sunshine or it's being more outside. And so it's interesting. It's a trend, or it's holidays. There's many confounding factors. And on the environment, we don't have so many studies. I think the only study that comes to mind is a study we did in India on cities and rural area. And we were looking at the glycan and inflammation there. And we thought that the rural area will have better results than the city. And it was the opposite, because of all the pesticides, toxin, everything that's used in agriculture. So although you are in nature, it's unfortunately artificial. Well, it's heavily lots of chemicals in the process, and that seems to
That really makes me sad.
Negative to the city.
Yeah, Jesus. What so I worked in Birmingham for a number of years, and I worked in the East Midlands as well. And what shocked me the most when I was a senior manager in Birmingham was the amount of people that had cancer and got sick and were long-term had problems. And I'd only spent 3 years in that office. And I spent 10 years in the other office, completely different worlds. And they're about an hour's drive apart. But it was honestly, it was the same sort of job, same sort of office, but the amount of like illness and death in one compared to the other, it was truly shocking to me from, not different countries. So I guess, do you have any data on like which countries are going to give you a good biological age, and thoughts on like blue zones and that sort of thing? Can you just talk to me about locations and sunshine levels and all that sort of stuff?
Yes, I think because again, you have so many confounding factors, it's not so easy to make conclusions. But we had a big study on 30 plus different populations around the world. And that went from, we had Thailand, Papua New Guinea, Uganda, really. And we also had immigrants, British immigrants of different descent. And there we saw that the highest correlation with it was life expectancy in the country and the economic development index. So it didn't matter if it was a Caucasian background or any other background. It was really this development of a country that we see has anyhow correlates highly with life expectancy. So socioeconomic status is a huge driver of that. And you see this in England, Richmond to Blackpool. It's the socioeconomic status that has the biggest effect, which could go back to stress. And kind of being stuck in survival, having a certain environment where you optimize for short-term, not long-term survival. But then in the blue zones, they're a different case because you have low socioeconomic status, but you have high life expectancy. So they're an anomaly in the general data. And you can't really separate the social component of the movement. Usually I think we studied 100-something centenarians so far, and most of them still work. In later, they have purpose. So there's so many factors here that I don't think it's any one thing they eat, because they eat very different things, blue zone to blue zone, and some of them smoke, they drink wine, they do all that. Like the lady who, if the records are true, who lived to 122, she was a smoker. Her whole life. So, and then there was a joke, I think, what did she say? She had a bet with her last doctor that, I don't know what it was. He was going to give her something around the house and the mortgage if she outlives him, and he died much sooner than her. So I think, you can't put it in one thing, but I think this mental health social component is probably a crucial element. And I think here what builds resilience, obviously they like in Costa Rica, you don't have nursing homes. You have nursing day care. So you take your grandparents to a house where they play music and have fun and interact, and then you take them home at the end of the day, as if you're dropping your children to school. So it's not the mentality we have in the UK, where you send your kids to boarding school and then you send your parents to nursery, and there's no integration, or these relationships are very kind of, how would I say, they're it's not good. They're, how would you say, they're colder.
Yes.
There's no looking after each other as much as it is in other countries.
Yeah. My wife's family's Polish, and they do it very differently. Like the grandma's 95 and she still lives in her own home, and she has round the clock support, but they would never put her into a care home, where in England we're like, see you later. It's just different cultures. Have you ever seen a documentary called Babushkas of Chernobyl?
No.
Well, I'll just tell you quickly because it's fascinating. So after the Chernobyl accident happened in '86, everybody got evacuated, and a group of women snuck back into their homes, and they're still there today. And they said, "We're not going anywhere. This is our village. These are our houses." The scientists are fascinated, so they go and test them every year. They've got really high levels of radiation. They grow their own vegetables full of radiation, and they're all in their 80s now as well. And the most fascinating thing that I heard in the documentary was one of them said, all my friends that went to the city, they all got cushy jobs and they're all dead. And I think she said something like they melted into their jobs or something like that. And these women have got, support of each other. So they've got community. They've got all these harsh elements they have to overcome. They're physically moving their bodies and eating fresh vegetables. There's no ultra processed foods really going on. And so it's fascinating that this thing of radiation, and they've somehow not beat it, but in the odds of what we today would consider to be really terrible for your health, they've outlived all of their ancestors, all of their friends.
Yeah, I think similar if you think of microplastics. It wasn't here. Now we have huge amount of that. Everybody does. And we seem to be surviving relatively well. And I think for some people it causes problems, for others less so. And then maybe this will come to resilience, and this is probably something you can build for life. And maybe one element of that is having challenges, and you can think of it as stressors, different stressors, where for some reason certain people manage to overcome them. And now we need to learn what it is that helps you overcome it. But one interesting group similar to that one is the Holocaust survivors. There's an incredible amount of centenarians there. And now you can say that it was a selection bias, but also it could be this resilience that was built that served them lifelong. So I don't think this stress exposure is negatively all bad. I think it's the resilience we can build to it. And obviously, that's very hard work on certain
That's fascinating
experiences. But
Yeah. Same with my Polish grandma. She went through the war. She lost her dad when she was like a child, and so there's a resilience that I guess she had to have. I want to just ask you the last couple of questions. I know we're almost out of time. One of the most interesting breath-related quotes is from the New England Medical Journal in '88, and it says something along the lines of the number one predictor of mortality was not smoking, cholesterol, or I think even cancer. They said it was lung capacity. So they believed lung capacity was the number one predictor of mortality. And just as you've been talking today, I'm thinking, well, this kind of makes sense, because if you're breathing properly and you've got the ability to move a lot of air easily, you're probably less stressed because you're breathing in a more rhythmic, gentle pattern. Your lymphatic system's probably cleansing the toxins out of your body easier. I'm sure there's a whole host of other things. But what are your thoughts on that quote? Do you think it makes sense?
Oh, I would love to see the study. If you can find it and share it. I think it does. It makes perfect sense. So,
yeah. Okay. Last question. Foods for low inflammation. Okay, is there any truth to this? Because I hear about take your turmeric and you've got to have it with oil and cardamom and black pepper, and I did that for a while, and I spent loads of money on expensive turmeric, and I felt completely the same. So I don't have that now. So what are your thoughts on these anti-inflammatory foods? And on the flip side of that coin, what are your thoughts on reducing inflammatory foods? Like where's the values in those two?
Okay, so where do we start? We have we have a small effect in some, like omega-3. We had a nice study with NAD boosters. It was a very nice, double-blind crossover or blinded crossover. Great design. Had an impact of 1.26 years up to a month. So supplements have a small effect. It doesn't compare to hormones or stress or some other interventions. Caloric restriction works on most of the cohorts we've had, which most of them are slightly overweight. And we had a study where you had 800 people on caloric restriction for 8 or 12 weeks, something like that. And then they went on maintenance diets, which were different whole food, healthy food categories, high protein, even high carb, high fat. And in each of those cohorts, half people see anti-inflammatory effect, half see pro-inflammatory effect of the exact same diet. So there's no one size fits all. And we are very diverse in the foods that work for us because it's optimized for survival. We're supposed to survive on all kinds of different foods. And everybody will have certain categories that work for them better or less, but we don't yet have the right tools to do personalized diet. So I think here there's some general things like a diverse microbiome prepares you for diverse food. And here we had hard studies where you do microbiome transplant, so FMT, for colitis patients, and we see their immune system rejuvenate greatly and become anti-inflammatory. So having a healthy microbiome, and that predominantly is plants, fiber, everything that kind of feeds that gut bacteria. But there's no one anti-inflammatory food. And I think we haven't had a solid study on that. I think we had some people try with some pilots, and I cannot tell you that we've seen strong effect of these supposedly anti-inflammatory food, but it all comes, where is it sourced? I think there's a lot of conflict. And when we were looking at the omegas, they were omega fortified eggs, so real eggs. So versus non-omega 45. So probably the combination of that has an impact. But again, it's real food. It's not a supplement. And then the other thing that seems to work very well, but it won't work for everybody. And I think here there's going to be a lot of personalization, but therapeutic fasting. So not eating anything for 3 to 7 days. We've had nice studies on that. They're about to be published. And we see in a very short time frame, your immune system become anti-inflammatory. And here it could also be happening for glycans, because we create these complex sugars, they're in our gut, and we are feeding the bacteria we like. So if your stomach is empty, then you're only keeping the bacteria you want to keep, in a way. That's one theory of it. So I think there's nutritional modalities that work: caloric restriction, weight loss in any form, fasting, and then finding, what diet works for you. But I can tell you that they're optimal tools. And what you can do is test the before and after, and you can do it. We see strong effect on the immune system for whatever diet, but there's other things you can also look at. And then it's finding what food is anti-inflammatory for you. And this will vary person to person, country to country. There's so many different factors that come into it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I know we're so desperate to find the one thing. And it's the same in breath work. It's funny because I'm trying to pin you down for something, and I have to have the same conversations. And there isn't a special breathing technique that's going to do everything for you. We've got to look at your goals, where your breathing is now, and we've got to fix certain things specific to you versus somebody else. But my brain still goes, no, but just tell me, is it turmeric? Is it cardamom? What is it I should be taking? It's funny how our brains work. Is there anything we haven't covered you wanted to go over?
I think we did a good diet.
Yeah. We covered a lot.
Anything else in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that you mentioned something about ADHD and sleep and noise. If you could just expand on that a little bit, that'd be interesting.
Yes, so it's a personal kind of. So I moved out of my home at 16, and I lived alone, and I had a small business in high school and then university. And I was so my hometown is about half an hour away from where I was then. This was maybe 14 years after, or 10 years after the war, because it lasted for about 5 years. So it's half an hour away from where you had this genocide in the Yugoslavia falling apart in the Civil War. And there's been a huge effect on the environment. So when my parents grew up there, it was a very nice place to live. But then after that, it was a very aggressive, unsafe. It's not today, today, I think. And even then, maybe if I didn't take some risks very early on, I wouldn't have had some experiences. But I had somebody who was installing a door on my house. It was a supposed friend, installed a door in a way that you can't lock it. So I had somebody come over that evening when I came back from school and tell me that how this door is installed is made so you can't actually lock it, although it was supposed to be a super safe door. So he fixed that, and I was anticipating somebody maybe breaking in during the night. And then he did break in the morning with a gun. And luckily I had a friend, the same friend came over for coffee. So it was I guess too many people. He was shocked that there was another person there. I guess he was expecting me on my own. But then I moved back to my mother's house. But then after a month or two, I went back and I lived alone. And I lived alone, like I've lived alone for a very young age. So I constantly have this fear of somebody breaking into the house. And I'm very hypervigilant at night. It doesn't happen always. Sometimes I can sleep quite soundly, but it's a type of PTSD. So even yesterday, I think I was up at 5 a.m. I heard a sound. I thought, oh, maybe somebody broke into the house. So that's PTSD. It doesn't get resolved with just psychoanalysis. I will try EMDR. That's supposedly an interesting modality. I haven't started yet, but that's my plan for it. But I have this hypervigilance because of experience at age 16.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Wow. You know, it's crazy, isn't it? The world, the lives we can all live. And you think about Europe, it's such a small place, and the stuff that's gone on over the last 100 years is insane. I think most of us have no comprehension of what else is out there because we've lived very soft lives, especially me in England.
Yes, but it's not. I mean, I have friends who had people break into their house in London in the last couple of years. It's not something that just happened in that time in that country. I think we have a lot of traumatic events happen absolutely everywhere. They're just not as common, maybe in places gone through high conflict.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So of course, so yes, your nervous system is wired to keep you safe and keep you alive, and so it's like we need to be extra vigilant in case this pattern happens. It's like when you put your hand over the hot flame, right? You're not going to do it a second time because it hurts. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating.
You're welcome, but it can be for different people. It can be a kid crying.
Yes.
And then you kind of constantly have this, you can be hypervigilant for, things which are, nothing to do with trauma. They're, different things have similar impact.
If people want to go ahead and do their own tests, we're going to put the links down below, but just for the podcast, like where will we sending them? Where's the best place to go?
On our website. So we have, I don't know if they gave you a special code. I guess if yes, we can add it to the end. But we have a consumer side. So if you are just you want to test yourself, you can get a test on our website. And there's just trying one test. There's subscriptions for once a year, twice a year. And every test comes with a consultation with our specialist team, which are doctors, clinical nutritionists, sports scientists. We, of course, have AI specialists and doctors, but we see that this human component, especially when it comes to human problems, is very effective in helping you do behavioral change and then have an impact on your long-term health. So that's free. It's a part of the service. We don't make it mandatory, but we highly recommend it to everybody who tries the test. And then if you're looking for a provider, we work with longevity medicine clinics, functional medicine. There's different providers around the world. There's about 2,000 of them, and it's depending on, it can be a menopause clinic, it can be a functional medicine doctor, depending on the more treatment modality you're looking for. Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, as a parent to a young child, going through this process with your company has been so fascinating, because my goal is to live as long and healthy as possible now, so I can see my son, because I'm an old dad as well. I became a dad at 40, so I'm already working against the biological clock. So this has been so important and so fascinating to go through. So thank you so much. And if people have got the opportunity, I really recommend giving it a crack, because you get incredible data and I already know some extra bits now. So thank you so much. And really interesting conversation. So until next time, thank you, Nicolina, for being on the show.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cool. Just going to pause the conversation for 2 ticks. You might be curious how you can get your own GlycanAge test done. So we've popped the link below. It's really painless, quick and easy to do. You get your results back fast, and then GlycanAge really look after you, because they give you a report afterwards, and sometimes you might even get a call with one of the staff, which is so cool. So everything's down below, and if you do purchase a test using that link, we do get a little kickback to the channel as well, so you're supporting this podcast to bring you more guests like what we've got here. All right, here's Nicolina. Let's get back on with the show.